Carrie and I are going on a backpacking trip again. And so we've been watching, she doesn't, I watch incessantly YouTube videos about how to backpack so that I can become a better backpacker. And mostly I like watching videos about gear and how I can spend all of our money. And there's this one guy in particular, because I really like gear, and I really like backpacking gear. I love really cool stuff. And there's this one guy, Dan Becker is his name, and he has this kind of cool channel. I like him a little bit because he's kind of like Carrie and I. He got started mostly as a weekend warrior, going backpacking on the weekends, and he's done some pretty big stuff, but he's not a thru hiker. He's not a professional backpacker like some of these people are, although now he kind of is. His channel's big enough. And I like this guy. He reviews all sorts of different gear and every like new thing that comes out. A lot of the thru hikers, they always talk about how they don't get sent gear from any companies and they don't take free stuff and all that. This guy is not that guy. This guy gets free stuff sent from all the companies and then he just reviews it. And so I kind of like his channel. But recently he put out this video that was kind of counterintuitive for a gear channel. Like the whole point of his show is reviewing gear. And he put out this show talking about the basics that you need to go backpacking. What are the basics that you need to go backpacking? Because what he had done is he'd done this poll of all the people who are subscribers to his channel and found out that 21% of the people that subscribe to his channel have never gone backpacking a day in their lives. And he was kind of blown away by that. And big part of it was like he was thinking to himself, like why not? Why have you not gone backpacking if you're sitting watching backpacking videos? And so he said, look, here's the basics. This is what you need if you want to be a backpacker. You need a shelter system of some kind. Tent, bivy sack, tarp, hammock. You need some form of shelter. You need a cooking system of some kind. Somehow you have to be able to treat water and cook food. Even if it's not cooking, just cold soaking, but somehow you have to figure out how to feed yourself. You need a sleep system of some kind so that you don't freeze to death. You need a backpack. That's a fairly important part of backpacking. You need food of some kind, and then you need kind of first aid and safety gear. And you don't need a lot of that. It's like that's all you need, just those basic things, and then just get out on the trail. That's really all you need. You don't have to have everything perfect, because what he realizes is that if 21% of the people who are watching his show have never gone backpacking, like a good chunk of those people are probably kind of waiting until they figure out like what the perfect stuff is. You want to have all the perfect gear, the perfect clothes, the perfect tent, the perfect sleeping bag, the perfect everything. And then once you get all the perfect gear, then you can go backpacking. And probably I imagine some of these people are not just watching his channel, but lots of other channels, so they learn all the stuff so that they can, once they have it all perfect, once they get everything perfect, they can head out on the trail. And so he made this video and he said, look, no, that's not at all. Get all these basic stuff. You can buy it all at Walmart, for crying out loud, and get out on the trail. He's like, go for one night. Just do whatever you got to do. Get out on the trail. That's all that's required. Now, you can learn some stuff, you can buy some stuff, and you can have a much more enjoyable experience if you have better gear, etc., and some better skills. But he's like, just get on the trail. And so Carrie and I were walking the dog, and we were talking a little bit about this, and we were talking about how it's a lot like Christianity. In that Christianity, there's so many people who struggle with the idea of Christianity. They struggle with the idea of following Jesus because they feel like there's so many things that you have to figure out and get perfect before you can really do this being a Christian thing, this following Jesus thing. And I think we need desperately to get back to the basics, but get back to this simple understanding of what it means to follow Jesus. And I was thinking about so what would the things be, like not shelter system and cook system and sleep system and all that? What would it be for following Jesus? And I thought to myself, the only thing required for you to start following Jesus is a desire to follow Jesus. That's it. That's all you have to get started following Jesus. That's it. There were a bunch of disciples back in the day who listened to Jesus talk and they're like, I think I'm going to follow this guy. And then they started following. Now they're followers of Jesus. If Jesus took like 3 steps past and you take 1 step towards him, you are technically now a follower of Jesus. That's all that's required. You don't have to have your life figured out. You don't have to have a good selection of Christian t-shirts or anything like that. You don't need to not swear. You don't need to stop drinking. You don't need to stop smoking. You don't need to stop doing you don't need any of that to become a follower of Jesus. All you need is a desire to follow Jesus. That's the basics. Simple as that. Now, like backpacking, there are some things Jesus taught, etc., showed us, modeled for us, that will make the process of following Jesus easier, will make the process of following Jesus better for you, less destructive, etc. But the basics of what it means to follow Jesus is just a desire to follow Jesus. That's it. And most of us, especially those of you who are here, you're here in person, and some of you are online. And you clicked on a link in somebody's feed and said, I'm going to watch that, even if it's for a couple seconds, because there's a little desire or a lot of desire to follow Jesus. Some of us have been following Jesus for a long time, some of us not for very long. And I want to get back to this idea of what are the basics for what it means to follow Jesus. And so we're going to be starting a new series. And it's something that I want to do regularly. I think I want to try to make my way through the Gospels, at least drop into one of the Gospels for a significant amount of time every year, as long as I get to be part of this thing called Vox. Because I think what happens with Christians is we stop talking about Jesus. We stop focusing on Jesus. We stop listening to what Jesus is teaching us. And we drift away into some other stuff, and all of a sudden we're having all sorts of arguments about stuff that Jesus didn't even bother talking about. And it reminds me again of like, okay, wait, we got to get back to the basics. And then we can go talk. It's not that the other stuff's not important, but I think if we don't keep coming back to that center of what it means to follow Jesus, I think it's how Christianity gets so goofy. I really honestly think that's what happened. The more we focus on Jesus, it's hard to get goofy. But when you drift away from Jesus, that's when the goofy stuff starts to show up. And not just the goofy stuff, but the destructive, the hurtful, the condemning, the stuff that's really dark and nasty about church sometimes can show up as well. The Gospel of John is still widely held. One of the things you find when you study theology is that books that have people's names on them, there's lots of people who make their career out of trying to prove that that person did not write that book. The Gospel of John is actually still widely held by most scholars, believe that it was probably written by the Apostle John. And so this was written by John, Jesus' disciple John, who's the brother of James, the sons of Zebedee, who were called sons of thunder by Jesus, which I find interesting considering that John talks a lot about love, etc. And there seems to have been a change in him because him and his brother are called the sons of thunder. That's a bit of a different kind of vibe. Anyways, John was probably one of John the Baptist's disciples. We're not 100% sure, but we know that when Jesus started teaching, some of John the Baptist's disciples left and started following Jesus. And there's a lot of speculation that John was one of those because he writes a lot about these conversations, private conversations that were happening with John the Baptist. And it sounds kind of like he was present for those conversations, which is kind of interesting. One of the things I love that John does in his gospel, 6 times he refers to himself with the phrase, the disciple whom Jesus loved. Now, I think he's trying to be modest and not include his own name in the book that he's writing. I think that's what he's doing, but it sounds a little bit, the disciple whom Jesus loved. Like he wrote this when most of the other disciples were still alive, right? And likely, he's like, hey, Peter, can you read this manuscript? I wrote one of those gospel things that, Matthew and Mark and Luke had written, and I want you to take a look at it. Tell me what you think. Can you imagine Peter getting to the first time that happens, right? He's flipping through. That's not bad. The disciple whom Jesus loved. Excuse me, I think he loved all of the disciples. I'm pretty confident he loved me too. Right? Like you can imagine, it wouldn't have gone great, right? The disciple whom Jesus loved. 6 times he calls himself the disciple whom Jesus loved. I'm sure that bothered all of the other disciples. He's also the one who talks about running to the tomb when they hear that Jesus is risen from the dead. And he includes the little detail that he got there first. Like, So I think he's kind of that guy. Anyways, because he's just like, one of the disciples, we won't name who, got there first, and then Peter arrived later because he's out of shape. Anyways, one of the disciples, Trevor, got there first in the race. Nathan came later once the Uber dropped him off. Anyways, this is also likely written somewhere around between 65 and 75 CE. That matters. That matters. It's a fairly early manuscript. It's another one of these manuscripts that were written while people were still alive who had seen what had happened. And so we've talked about that in the past, but it's important to know. But what I want to do today is I want to start with the opening passage of John. The opening passage of John might be one of the most epic opening lines. I think it's better than Call Me Ishmael. It is like this epic opening line. Somebody wrote that if the Gospel of John is the pearl of great price in the Bible, then this opening verse is the pearl within John. And it begins like this. In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word was with God in the beginning. Everything came into being through the Word, and without the Word, nothing came into being. What came into being through the Word was life, and the life was the light for all people, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness doesn't extinguish the light. In the beginning was the Word. This is another reason why I think John had a bit of a complex, or was a little arrogant maybe, because John begins his book here, his gospel account, with the same opening line of the Torah, in the beginning, right? In the beginning. But what John does is he's very clear right off the bat. Most scholars think this is why he decided to write his gospel. There have been other gospels, other accounts of Jesus going around, and John has gotten upset about something, and so he decides that he's going to clear a few things up, and he's going to do that right from the get-go. And so he goes right back to the beginning, and there's something incredibly simple but complex about all this, because right from the beginning, John is incredibly clear that Jesus is God. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. How? Now, I don't know about you guys, but you remember when the Da Vinci Code was going around, there was a lot of talk around this idea in the Da Vinci Code. There was this wild fabrication that Dan Brown comes up with, that the Council of Nicaea was where they decided that Jesus was divine. Up until then, everybody thought he was just a human. Then the Council of Nicaea happens, and now he's divine. And the character in the book says he was human one day and divine the next. Right? As simple as that. It's total BS. Is not at all the case. The Council of Nicaea happens in 325 CE. This is written 65, 75 CE. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Kapow. Bang. Done. Drops the microphone, which they don't have at that point. Drops the cupped hands. Can't really do that either. But anyways, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And this stuff matters, and we'll talk about it again and again and again through the book of John. It matters that Jesus is divine. It matters that he is fully human but also fully God. It matters because life sucks sometimes. It matters because life is hard sometimes. It matters because following Jesus is hard sometimes. And the thing that makes things so different for us and so many other religions is that we have a God who understands what we go through. Hebrews chapter 4:14 says, let's hold on to the confession, since we have a great high priest who passed through the heavens, who is Jesus, God's Son. Because we don't have a high priest who can't sympathize with our weaknesses, but instead one who was tempted in every way that we are, except without sin. It matters because we have a God who understands what it's like to be us, and I hold on to that a lot. I hold on to that reality. But it also matters because if Jesus isn't God, we have another problem. If Jesus isn't God, we have another problem. There's a theologian, C.K. Barrett. He writes this. He says, the deeds and words of Jesus are the deeds and words of God. If this be not true, the book is blasphemous. It matters because the stuff that Jesus does Like, for example, forgiving sins. Right? Go, your sins are forgiven. The Pharisees knew what that meant. The priests knew what that meant. They lost their minds. Because only God can do these things. There's so many things that Jesus does that only God can do. And it's important that we understand that as we go back. And this is what John wants to shut down. John wants to shut down right off the bat that Jesus is just some guy. He's just some dude. He wants to make sure we understand that this is God incarnate, that Yahweh has come here. And so he goes back to the beginning, but he goes back even further than the beginning. He goes even further. So it goes within the beginning was the Word, except that it goes even past where Genesis starts. Genesis starts with the Hebrew word rayashith, which means in the beginning. That's where it comes from. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But this isn't far enough back for John, so John goes to the beginning before the beginning, right? So not just in the beginning when the heaven and when the universe is created, in the beginning when God creates the heaven and the earth, he goes back before that. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Then that moves forward to in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. It's a little complicated bit of Scripture. And it gets even more complicated because there's all this word stuff going on in this little passage of Scripture. In the beginning was the Word, the Word, the Word, the Word, the Word, the Word, the Word. And it gets kind of weird, and it starts to trip over itself a little bit. And you get the feeling like there's more going on. And that's what I love about John. Somebody once said that the book of John is like it's simple enough that it's like a children's wading pool, but it's deep enough that an elephant could jump in. Like it's that kind of, that's sort of weird both and. So a little bit of language stuff. The Greek word for the word, the Greek word that's translated as word here in this passage is the word. Anybody know? Of course you know. Yeah? Logos. There you go. The word logos, which is a big deal word. So the first word, it's the Greek word logos. Now here's the thing. This word meant something back then. It was a big deal. Okay? Because this word logos was connected to a whole bunch of other pagan philosophies that were really popular at the time. One in particular was this philosophy of Gnosticism. Now, if you've been around church for any time, you've heard preachers talk about Gnosticism over the years because it pops up in a whole bunch of the letters that Paul writes. Because it was a heresy that would float in and out of the churches. And it's a heresy that still floats around today in a lot of churches. One of the tenets of Gnosticism was this idea that the created world, so matter, was evil in and of itself. Right? So did you feel a little bit of that? Some of you who grew up in more traditional churches and conservative churches, there was an element of that. That when they would talk about the world, that we have to be separate from the world, there was a sense that the world was all that stuff out there. And then there was this idea that we had to focus on heavenly things, spiritual things, because the spiritual was good and the created matter was evil and bad. So there was this idea, Gnosticism was this Christian heresy that had a lot to do with trying to somehow free yourself from this evil physical body through attaining knowledge. And so this idea of logos was a step that you actually had to get through on your way to God. And so John is deliberately using this particular word. Could have used some others, and he decides he's going to use this word because he's trying to destroy as many of these false ideas as he can. So he grabs this word, logos. He grabs this word. Because Gnostics, they emphasize personal spiritual knowledge over teaching and traditions. They were like the original conspiracy theorists. But John's not having it. What's interesting, too, so there's this word logos. But what's also interesting is that this Greek word corresponds to an Aramaic word. So that the Gospels have been translated, we have them in Aramaic, which was kind of the very common language of that day from that area. Kind of everybody knew how to speak Aramaic. It was kind of a trade language. And so there's an Aramaic word, memra, which means word as well. And so when logos is translated in Aramaic, it's this word memra. But the thing about this Aramaic word memra is that this word is like a technical theological term as well, and the rabbis used the word memra. Whenever God was expressing himself, they would use this word. Whenever God was showing himself, it was God's memra that they would use, that they would talk about. Then, we got to look at the Old Testament. So in the Hebrew Bible, in the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, the word logos is used to translate the Hebrew word davar. Now, what's fascinating about the Hebrew word davar, I can feel you guys, I'm losing you. This Hebrew word davar can be translated as word, right? So we have logos, word, memra, word, but memra is specifically this, like God expresses himself. Now we have this word davar, which can mean word, but davar can also mean thing, object. Thanks for coming. No, we're not done yet. Okay. So we've got logos, means word. Memra means word. Davar means word, can also mean thing. There's this theologian who was a Messianic Jew who started Voice of the Martyrs, if you know anything about that, but he also spent a lot of World War II rescuing Jews. And he suggests this understanding, this translation of how to best understand what John is saying here in John chapter 1. In the beginning was the real thing. In the beginning was the real thing. Think about that. In the beginning, before the earth is created, remember, because John has gone to the beginning before the beginning. So in the beginning was the real thing. Before anything's created, the real thing exists. The most real thing. In the beginning was the real thing. Listen to John. In the beginning was the real thing. And the real thing was with God, and the real thing was God. The real thing was with God in the beginning. Everything came into being through the real thing. And without the real thing, nothing came into being. What came into being through the real thing was life, and life was life for all people, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness doesn't extinguish the light. Here's why I think this matters. I think that John understood that we're going to lose sight sometimes of what the real thing is. What I find fascinating about this, too, is the best translation is not in the beginning was a real thing. It's the real thing. It is the most real thing. In the beginning was the real thing. That's a significant difference. That's something that actually matters. That's a real thing that other things can build on top of. The real thing. Think about... for all of you who are here in Barrie, the Ann Street Bridge has been, for those of you who aren't, the Ann Street Bridge, this huge bridge over the 400 highway, was blown up, and they're rebuilding it. And it's been lovely to live near that construction this summer, because all of a sudden one day I didn't hear it, and I got nervous. Something felt funny in the house, and I realized I wasn't hearing the like boom, 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 all day long. You can hear boom, because they're driving those piles down into the ground to try to get down to bedrock. They have these giant I-beams. They look smaller when you drive by, but they look big enough that I'd love to actually get up close and see what the actual measurement is on. I feel like they're like 18-inch I-beams that are just being driven down into the ground as far as they go, and then they weld another one on and they start driving that down until they get the whole thing all the way down in there until it hits bedrock. And they're going to drive, it looks like they're driving like 20 or 30 of these things for each side all the way down until they sit on bedrock. And then it looks kind of like a weird little porcupine kind of thing going on in the ground, because there's all these little fingers coming up out of the ground. And then what they're going to do is they're going to pour concrete all around the top of all of those piles that go all the way down into the ground, and they're going to join it all together as one bridge foundation. Which I think is hilarious, because I was watching as they took the other foundation out from the old bridge that's been there for I don't know how long. The old foundation was not very deep underneath the ground, and it was just sitting on sand. Right? as they took it down, I remember watching as they kind of blew the whole bridge up, and then they started making their way down the kind of big standy uppy bit, and then it got down to that's the technical term, and then it got down to the footings, and the footings weren't that huge, and they were just sitting on sand. They cracked them up with the big machine, threw them into trucks, and carried them away. But now they've got all these things that are going all the way down to bedrock. It's a great idea. Because building on sand is a bad idea. John's buddy Matthew is going to tell a story about that in his gospel. Don't build your house upon the sand. Get down to bedrock. We're all looking for bedrock in our lives. We're all looking for that thing that becomes the foundation, that thing that we can make all the other decisions based off of, that thing that we can build our lives on. Everybody's got some sort of bedrock in their lives, right? Some people's family, every decision, every dollar, everything is spent around the idea of family. And that's how they make all of their decisions. For some people, it's literally money. I'm blown away by it, but you do. You see people who having money and more money, that is the bedrock of their life. That's how they're going to make every decision that comes along. For some, it's just fun. The bedrock of their life is just whatever makes them produce dopamine and feel happy. That's the bedrock of their life. The question is, we're all kind of looking for that bedrock of our lives. We're all trying to figure out how to make decisions. And what's the bedrock of your life? Really, what's at the core? What's at the foundation of your life, right? What's the most real thing in your life? What's the most real thing? A lot of stuff's not real. Trevor and I talk about this sometime about money. Because, you work in the stock market and there's all this money that it's not real. It's ones and zeros. It's trading hands, but you never touch it. We don't touch money anymore. Somebody gave me a $10 bill the other day, and I wasn't sure what it was. I was like, oh, look, get this. Like, you could touch it and hold on to it. It was like actually like in my hand. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of crazy. And that's not even real. That just says this is worth a certain amount of gold that the country that issued it has on hand. You know what I mean? Like, so what's the most real thing in your life? And what John is saying here is John is saying Jesus is the most real thing. In the beginning was the real thing, and the real thing was with God, and the real thing was God. He's saying Jesus is the most real thing, which is a huge claim. Now, there's lots of philosophies. There's lots of you go to the self-help section at the bookstore or on Amazon and type in self-help and categories, and there's a ton of things competing for being real things, but not the real thing. Do you know what I mean? They're not actually competing to be the foundation. They're just saying, look, here's some truths, here's some stuff that you should put in your life. But John is really claiming that Jesus is the real thing. And the question that I kind of have is, can Jesus live up to that claim? Can Jesus live up to the claim of being the real thing? And that's really then what we're going to do as we go through the book of John, right? We're going to see, does Jesus live up to that claim? Is Jesus the most real thing? Is Jesus worth letting be the foundation of my life? Is Jesus worth being the thing that I make some decisions on? And I'm very careful here to say, is Jesus worth that? Not is Christianity the most real thing, particularly these days, but is Jesus the most real thing? Is that something that Jesus can actually hold up to? I think he does. I think he pulls it off. I got thinking about the intersection of that machine driving piles into the ground to make a foundation for that bridge, and our idea of a bigger table at Vox. And at Vox, we talk about how the bigger table has 4 legs, right? We talk about how the bigger table has 4 legs. And total authenticity is one of the 4 legs of that table. That if we're going to truly have a community where we can welcome new people into our little family, it's going to need to be the kind of place where people are honest, open, and authentic about who they are. That's what has to happen. It needs to be the kind of place where you don't have to come in with your mask on Your metaphorical mask on, you are 100% legally required to wear your physical mask when in church. Not the kind of place where you have to have a metaphorical mask. Not the kind of place where you need to feel shame for your brokenness and for your sinfulness. We know that you're broken and sinner. We know that. We all know that. You're not fooling anybody anyways. And so this idea of authenticity is so important. But here's what I got thinking about. I got thinking about the piles being driven down into the ground, and I got thinking about this table leg of total authenticity, and I got thinking that authenticity needs to be built on top of something. Do you know what I mean? Because that's what the real thing is. And so real things that matter, things like love and hope and faith, those kinds of real things, relationship, community, like mutual care and compassion, mercy, grace, these real things, they need a foundation. They got to be built on top of something. Total authenticity needs to have something authentic as a foundation. There needs to be something authentic for us to be safe to be authentic. That's what makes it safe. There's a lot of places it's not safe to be authentic. It's not safe to be true. It's not safe to let everything out. You know, a lot of our friends from the LGBT community, they aren't able to do that in a lot of places. A lot of churches, they have to hide that because it's not safe. Because that's not based, it's not built on something authentic. It's not built on something real. It's not built on something that then begins to grow, and out of that comes this authentic, safe space. What's your life built on? What real things exist in your life? You know, and do you have this foundation to actually begin to build all of that up and around on? You know what I mean? That happens sometimes with people who want to follow Jesus. They'll pick and choose a few real things, right? And they'll pick and choose those things, but they don't have they don't have the most real thing to build the foundation on. And so they understand, hey, the Bible says don't judge, don't judge, don't judge. But the problem is they don't have something solid to put that don't judge on top of. They don't have, don't judge, but come alongside in love to help and support and encourage somebody who's walking along a very difficult road. See what I mean? So over the next few months, lots of months, I want to wrestle through this idea. I want to wrestle through this idea of building an authentic foundation and then building up something that is authentically simple. And trying not to make it overly complicated. I want to try to figure out what that looks like. But the book of John has a lot of depth. Right? On one hand, this book is, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. But on the other hand, we end up in all these kinds of weird Hebrew and Aramaic words and this idea of what constitutes real and what is the most real thing. There's this idea of simplicity and depth that goes all the way through John. There are these parables that have these very clear sort of teachings on the surface, but then they just go down and down and down. And I kind of want to wrestle through a lot of this. But the other thing that is beautiful about the book of John is that you can tell right away, because he goes back to the beginning before the beginning, that he has this huge picture in his mind that he wants to talk about. This huge story, the scope of John is just so huge. N.T. Wright says this about the book of John. He says, whatever else John is going to tell us, he wants us to see his book as the story of God and the world. Not just the story of one character in one place and time. This book is about the Creator God acting in a new way within his much-loved creation. It's about the way in which the long story which began in Genesis reached the climax the Creator had always intended. I love this idea of this book of John. That he's going all the way back. The book of John is not even just a story about Jesus. It's a story about this God. This Jesus who was the Word, he was in the beginning, he was with God, and he was God, entering into this world. And with that, He grabs all the way back at Genesis and sweeps that all the way forward into Jesus. And he goes all the way through to the end of time and sweeps it back to Jesus again. See how huge that is? See how real that is? How authentic, how deep, how foundational, how much bedrock exists there in this book. And the irony of it is that I started by talking about how I want to get back to something simple. And I think that's the beauty of this giant story. This giant story that reaches its climax in this person of Jesus, God incarnate. And from Genesis to the end of time gets summed up in Jesus saying, "Come follow me." I love that. I love that it is so encompassing and so incredibly simple all at the same time. Come follow me. Come follow me. Come follow me. Don't get distracted with all that other stuff. Just come follow me. I'll take care of it. I'll show you how to walk. I'll show you how to live. I'll show you how to be. Just come follow me. The most real thing. Come follow me. Let's pray. Ask worship team to come on up.